Alright, we are live. What is up, everybody? Happy Friday, or whatever day you are listening to this. Today I want to talk about, generally the way I'm actually going to be doing these podcasts now too, for those that are not on our emails newsletter, go to functional-lifestyles.com and there's the first button that you see there right in the homepage to sign up for the email newsletter, because I'm doing basically the podcasts on the same exact thing that I'm doing the email for that week. So obviously those will be in line for those that like to listen versus those that like to read, or they're like me, like to do both. That's an option for it. But today what I wanted to talk about is going to be goal setting and sacrifice, and kind of the equilibrium between both of those, right? And the importance of setting realistic expectations for yourself, but also, trying to find the balance between setting a goal that maybe scares you a little bit, but also something that's also not too easy, and making sure that we are all are setting goals, right? So we'll get into all of that stuff today. I really want to focus on, because this has been a conversation that's popped up a few times over the last couple weeks, and that's obviously where this idea came from to do the podcast on. So where the conversation started with a client and myself was, we were talking about, we were doing a check-in and we were going over kind of goals, and it started to feel like the goals were getting just very vanilla. They weren't objective, right? And the one thing that we've learned kind of with check-ins on how we run our business for the in-person versus remote is, when you're only listening and doing subjective kind of measurements, like, hey, I feel good, I have better energy, it's a great way to kind of measure progress in the short term, but we also have to remember that the objective stuff is really what gives the detail to figure out if it's actually working, right? And why I say that is that the example that I'm using for the check-in that I was doing with a client, it sounded like things were going the right direction based off the subjective answers that I was getting. And I started to find out that as we did the more objective stuff, that I was like, oh, well, it doesn't really line up for what you're saying versus what we're seeing, right? So that's one thing, right? Is understanding that when you are setting goals, like, it's okay to, in the aspect of setting the goals and tracking the progress, to use both subjective and objective measurements, because we're trying to find kind of that equilibrium between both of those. But when you're setting goals, this is where I think a lot of people go wrong, right? We've all heard the good old, like, hey, SMART goals: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. That when you're setting goals, it's good not to just say them, it's good not to just talk about them, it's good to write. I mean, it's good to just put them as many places as you can. So I like to write them down, I like to talk about them out loud, I like to talk about them to people that are important to me. Obviously set those goals for myself in the macro, and then also set goals in kind of in the micro. And that's a big thing, right? So when you think about goal setting from the very macro level, understand that macro level could be, hey, this is going to be my annual goal, this is going to be my 5-year goal, this is going to be my 10-year goal. In the macro planning, you have to remember that you got to be kind of flexible in the process, right? Because things do change as we look at goal setting, right? When I think about, lifestyle goals for myself, or financial goals, or fitness goals, they've definitely changed a lot for over the last decade for myself. And if I were to think about maybe what I set as a macro goal at 20 years old versus now being 30, I'm sure it's very, very different for a lot of us, right? I know it's very different for me. So setting the macro goal is important because it does give us this kind of very over 30,000 view, point of view of what are we looking at overall. But we really, really want to stay present in the micro, right? Because I think this is where we get lost of not focusing on the process itself, and we're more fixated on kind of the end result. When you set these huge goals for yourself, I'm making, let's say, a story of like, hey, I'm making $50,000 a year, and I have a goal of I want to make $1 million a year, right? That can sound very overwhelming because that's a big jump. But if you break it down into the micro, it sounds more realistic, okay? It's like, okay, well, let's figure out how to get from 50 to 60 or 50 to 100 first, right? And breaking the macro up into the micro, right? So I tend, as a coach, to try to focus a little bit more on micro setting and use more of the macro as like a driver for the why, right? Like, what's the big thing that you're kind of striving for? And that could be, balance in your lifestyle between work and everything else, or whatever it might be for you, right? I don't really want to get into, obviously, what to set for goals, because that's up to you. So now let's kind of talk about what I mean by the goal setting versus level of sacrifice, right? And this is something I actually talked about in the email yesterday. It's just kind of a personal example for me. And obviously I'm going to try to keep these podcasts more focused around fitness stuff. Is when I first started exercising, I think like most people when they got into the gym, and especially for guys, it was always just very egotistical, aesthetically driven goal of like, hey, I just want to be as lean as I possibly can. I want to have as much muscle as I possibly can. I want to be strong. I wanted it all, right? And it tend to be very superficial because it got me into men's physique, which was a cool little part of my early on fitness career of doing competition. And men's physique is the very typical of like, hey, 4-month prep, 3-month prep, whatever it might be for those people. It's generally obviously year-round training, but prep itself of hardcore dieting, measuring food, weighing food, training like an animal multiple times a day, obviously multiple times a week, and trying to balance that all out with work and everything else that was going on at that age. And what I realized with my last show is my best result, placed first in both of them, both of my categories, and I realized that I still felt like unfulfilled. And I realized that after I took a step back after finishing the show, that it was like I was so focused on, you know, the result, but more importantly, less about the result of the show. I actually cared less about the show placing, more about just how I actually wanted to look, right? And I used kind of the show and the competition for motivation and something to actually drive me towards that goal. And what I realized is no matter how much weight I was putting on or how lean I was actually getting, it was never enough, right? And it's because I actually started to lose sight of kind of the process, right? And that's something now that if obviously you've been following me or been around me long enough, you know that's something I always talk about now is get focused in the micro and the process, because this is what keeps you present, this is what keeps you happy. If you set huge macro goals and you're only focused on the final destination of it, you're never present, right? You're always going to be anxious because you're always chasing something you never have. But the sacrifice thing, coming back to kind of that show example, is what I realized is even though I did at that time over the course of my life look the best, had the most muscle, was the leanest I've ever been, I also realized that there was things that were out of alignment with my lifestyle, what I wanted, right? Like what I mean by that is I would love to be 200 plus pounds and 5% body fat if it was healthy and sustainable. But it wasn't. And the reason why it wasn't sustainable is because I had to cut out alcohol every time I was doing prep. That's hard for me. I enjoy alcohol. I had to really almost cut socializing out as well, because I realized that when I was socializing, I naturally got influenced to drink more, be out later. And it just like, when you're focusing on a very, very intense goal, there comes with a lot of sacrifice. And that's what people need to remember is like, the bigger your goal is, it doesn't mean it's wrong or right. It doesn't mean it's realistic or unrealistic. It just means, hey, there's a ton more sacrifice that's going to come with that, right? And that's something that you need to make sure that you're in alignment with, because I see this all the time with clients, that we have these very ambitious goals, which I think are great, which is I think everyone should be setting, but then you realize that their level of sacrifice and our level of sacrifice is not even close to what the goal is, right? And you will never be happy if those two things are always out of alignment, right? So when looking at setting goals for yourself, and this could be health, this could be fitness, this could be relationship, this could be financial, this could be whatever, make sure you take a step back every time that you take the time to actually plan and set the goal and write it down and talk about it, that you're also putting equal amount of time and energy and resources into figuring out, is this what I want for my level of sacrifice for my lifestyle, right? Don't tell me you want to make $1 million a year if you want to take a vacation, 2 months out of, or 2 weeks out of every month, right? Like, there has to find the balance, and there is no wrong or right answer. And this is the cool thing about goal setting is like, hey, if you do want to be someone that like travels or has a lot of time off and more freedom to do kind of things for yourself and be with friends and family, just like, yeah, understand that maybe financially there's going to be a little bit of a kick in the nuts. But also the other way around too, right? If you have really, really ambitious goals financially for yourself, well, guess what? You're going to have limited time with your family and friends. Your social life is going to suffer and diminish a little bit. You're not going to have as much time to work on yourself, maybe with fitness and other things. But I mean, there's no absolute answer. There's no wrong or right answer. Just remember that we have to focus on these two things being in equilibrium with each other, because when they are, this is where we feel the best, right? When we feel the best, we perform the best, and that's exactly what we want. And when you are performing the best, guess what? You are working towards those goals and actually achieving them, right? Goals are dynamic. They're not something that's static, and I think people forget about that as we set a goal and we focus on that forever. It's forever changing, because you are forever changing. Your values, your sense of time, your sense of value in your lifestyle, and what you want for your balance, like those things will change, and so your goals obviously to follow that. So make goal setting something that is part of your practice of your life, right? Meaning it could be with everything that we talked about in every area of your life, but make it something that is consistent, because if we're not taking the time to plan and build structure around our goal setting and the macro and the micro and kind of the process itself, you're just kind of walking around in the dark. And I think this is also a big thing that we see with a lot of clients as well, is if you're shooting blind, you're not really making the progress that you want. And when you don't make progress, as humans, we're motivated by progress. It's pretty straightforward. So if you're not seeing progress in the gym or in your relationship, in your job, of course you're going to be demotivated by it. Of course you're not going to have the energy that you look for, that drives you and wakes you up every day, because it's not there, right? So just really, I try to make all these podcasts pretty short, but I just want people to really remember that when you're looking at setting goals, understand that goal setting is super important. But just goal setting by itself without measuring how you think is going to be best aligned with your life is just as bad as not even setting goals, right? So pay attention to setting the goals, the macro, the micro, the process. Set intention behind what you actually look for as a level of sacrifice that seems realistic to you, right? And really try to dig deeper into the why, right? And this is where I think when you look at goal setting, is the why is the driver. And a lot of people tend to give you very, very superficial answers, right? Like a lot of people come to the gym, use another example of, hey, I want to lose 20 pounds. Okay, cool. If I were to just move on, that would be my answer, right? But 20 pounds, why? Right? Well, maybe I want to be healthier. Maybe I'm not confident with my shirt off right now. Or maybe, whatever the driving factor is for you, there is a why, and that's the emotional hot button that you need to reach for yourself, because the why is the driving factor. Knowing what to do and how to do it, it's not rocket science. We can all figure those things out. But the thing that's going to keep this boat moving forward is going to be the why behind what you're doing, because that is your driver. That is the emotional connection. And to be honest with you, like, even though we have emotional, logical sides of our brains, we are all ran more off our emotional brain than we are our logical brain. We just hope, obviously, that our logical brain can catch up and do its thing to justify what you're doing emotionally. And that's something that as you build more awareness around your lifestyle, those things become more in line with each other, right? So I just want to kind of leave everyone with that. Obviously, goal setting being super important, but really kind of just paying attention to sacrifice. And, the motto of my business at Functional Lifestyles, and obviously the title of this podcast, is Pursuit of Balance. And this is something that I really preach, and you'll forever hear me talk about this on this, is your best life will be lived when you find the balance between what you have as ambition for your goals and what the level of sacrifice you're willing to give up in that lifestyle, and trying to find that sweet spot between taking care of yourself with your health, your fitness, and your nutrition, prioritizing your sleep, having good, meaningful relationships, having a good job that pays you well, that gives you the balance and kind of the excitement to show up every day. It's important to always be striving to optimize every area of our life, but more importantly, remember that balance is not static. Balance is dynamic, and this is why it's called Pursuit of Balance. So, same exact thing with the conversation of today is remember that sacrifice and goal setting, when these two things get in line, I'm telling you, it's a freaking superpower, because this is where you're going to achieve the most results, and this is where you're going to be able to cross off the most things of the goal setting checklist that you have set for yourself, right? So, hope everyone got some value out of this one today. I know this is something that's newer, and I'm now just kind of now starting to tell people that I'm doing this. So on Spotify, unfortunately, it's not under Pursuit of Balance, it's under Corey Mayu. Apple Podcasts, whatever other platforms, I think it's under Pursuit of Balance. So for those that are liking this stuff, obviously subscribe. I'm going to be doing these every single week, once a week, just kind of doing them on Fridays. Unless I'm gone, I'll do them sometime, but it always will be once a week. Something like this to keep it between 15 to 20 minutes, just to provide you guys some level of value on health, on fitness, on nutrition, on mindset, wherever it might be. And other than that, take care. Have a good weekend.